So I want you to imagine something kind of unsettling for a moment. What if, right at this exact moment, you looked up at the sky, past the clouds, past the atmosphere, and there is a mysterious satellite orbiting Earth that human beings did not build?
Yeah, an object sent by like an alien civilization thousands of years ago, just sitting in the cold dark and observing us.
Exactly. And welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this massive, century-old mystery that a whole community of people believes is not science fiction. I'm talking about the legendary Black Knight satellite.
Right. And, our goal today isn't just to tell a spooky story. We have some really detailed source material here, breaking down the timeline, the supposed evidence, and this really intense debate between the alien conspiracy theorists and the scientific community. We're going to look at it objectively.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Ah,
Because to understand how a 13,000-year-old alien probe ended up on official government radar, we actually have to rewind to a time before space travel even existed, like all the way back to 1899.
yeah, 1899. So we are going back to Nikola Tesla's experimental station in Colorado Springs.
Wow.
He had built this colossal magnifying transmitter out there. And to understand what that is, you have to imagine this massive spark gap coil designed to shoot, millions of volts of electricity into the atmosphere just to test wireless power transmission.
Which is just wild to think about.
Completely. And Tesla is alone in this laboratory out on the plains listening to the receivers attached to his equipment. And he starts picking up something really strange.
Right, because he's expecting, just the erratic crackle of natural static or like lightning storms discharging way off in the distance.
Exactly. But instead, he hears a rhythm.
Yeah.
It's this organized, deliberate sequence. He later described it as hearing numbers like 1, 2, 3, repeating in a way that felt, well, decidedly unnatural. Tesla genuinely suspected he had intercepted a communication from another planet.
Right, Mars or Venus, right.
Yeah, exactly. But the scientific consensus at the time simply wasn't equipped to handle that claim. Most of his peers just thought he was, misinterpreting natural electrical storms.
Or that his equipment was just feeding back on itself.
Right. Today, though, astrophysicists actually have a different read on it. We know now that planetary bodies emit natural radio waves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so Tesla's massive receiver might have been picking up signals from Jupiter's incredibly powerful magnetosphere just sweeping across the solar system. Or perhaps natural radio emissions called whistlers, which are generated by lightning interacting with Earth's upper atmosphere.
But because he was this eccentric genius operating at the absolute bleeding edge of technology, it made it incredibly easy for the scientific community to just, brush off his claims as an overactive imagination.
Right, they just dismissed it.
But that scientific safety net completely collapsed 30 years later. Because suddenly, in the late 1920s, radio operators all over the world weren't just hearing weird static anymore. They were getting physical echoes returning from space.
Yeah, and this brings us to the phenomenon known as long-delayed echoes, or LDEs.
Mm.
There was this Norwegian civil engineer named Jürgen Hals, and he was testing shortwave radio transmissions.
Okay.
Usually when you send a radio signal, it bounces off the Earth's ionosphere and comes back in, like a fraction of a second.
Yeah.
But Hals noticed that after the primary bounce, a second, fainter echo would arrive anywhere from 3 to 15 seconds later.
Which, okay, it's like shouting into a wide-open, completely flat desert and hearing an echo bounce back seconds later.
That's a great way to put it.
You know there's no wall there. You know there are no mountains, so what on earth is your voice hitting out there in the void? I mean, if I'm a scientist in 1928, and I know for an absolute fact that 0 human-made satellites exist, how do I possibly rationalize radio waves reflecting off an object in deep space?
Well, you really struggle too. And that became the defining puzzle of early radio astronomy. Because, radio waves travel at the speed of light about 300,000 kilometers per second.
That's fast.
Very fast. So a 3-second delay means that signal traveled roughly 900,000 kilometers out and back. That is well past the orbit of the moon.
Wow.
So what did it hit? Some researchers theorize the signals were getting trapped in plasma clouds in deep space, just sort of bouncing around in magnetic fields before escaping back to Earth.
But for people who remembered Tesla's old claims, those atmospheric explanations felt really incomplete. And then decades later, this Scottish astronomer named Duncan Lunan actually took the timing of those 1920s echo delays and graphed them out.
Yeah, this is where it gets a bit wild.
Right. He claimed the delays formed a literal star map pointing to the constellation Boötes. So the theory evolved that the echoes weren't just bouncing off random plasma, they were being intercepted and deliberately transmitted back by an automated extraterrestrial probe.
An ancient automated repeater station. And,
Mm.
I mean, it's a brilliant piece of speculative logic when you really think about it.
It kind of makes sense.
Right. If an advanced civilization wants to monitor a developing planet, they leave a probe in orbit. It's dormant for millennia. Then, when the planet finally develops radio technology and starts blasting signals into the cosmos, the probe catches them and pings them back.
Letting its creators know, like, hey, the species has reached a specific technological milestone.
Exactly. But up to this point, we only have invisible waves bouncing off what seems to be an invisible object.
Yeah, an invisible echo is one thing. But things escalated dramatically when the mystery transitioned from a weird radio anomaly to a physical object detected in Earth's orbit. And this happened right as the Cold War was brewing.
Yeah, the geopolitical landscape of 1954 is really the pressure cooker that shapes this entire narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the space race hasn't officially begun yet.
Yeah.
Sputnik is still 3 years away. The United States and the Soviet Union are the only players with even a theoretical ambition for spaceflight, and both are completely paranoid about what the other is doing.
Right, so the military is heavily funding these Skywatch programs, just desperately looking for anything out of the ordinary.
Yes. And then, newspapers across the country suddenly start publishing these startling reports claiming an unknown satellite had been detected orbiting the Earth.
In 1954.
Right. And the details point to an optical search being conducted at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. The military had actually brought in Clyde Tombaugh, he's the famous astronomer who discovered Pluto, by the way, to scan near-Earth space.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was him.
Yeah, he was using these telescopic cameras to photograph the sky, looking for streaks of light against the star field that would indicate, natural moonlets or uncharted debris.
Because the military was genuinely worried that if they launched a rocket, it might hit an unknown piece of space rock. Or far worse, that the Soviets had somehow secretly launched a surveillance platform.
Exactly. So when news leaked that Tombaugh's search might have actually found something in orbit, a prominent UFO researcher named Donald Keyhoe went straight to the press.
Of course he did.
Right. And he claimed the military had found one, or perhaps two, artificial satellites orbiting the equator.
And what's crazy is that both superpowers looked at the reports of this mysterious object in the sky, and both of them publicly stated, it's not ours.
And what's fascinating here is that when the two most powerful, secretive governments on the planet deny ownership of a mysterious object circling the globe, it creates this massive vacuum of information.
Oh, yeah.
The public is sitting in their living rooms practicing duck and cover drills, totally terrified of nuclear annihilation. They are primed to believe the sky is full of threats.
Because if the Americans say it isn't theirs, and the Soviets say it isn't theirs, and literally no other nation on Earth possesses the technology to put a tin can in orbit, let alone a satellite, human nature absolutely demands an answer.
Right. And when mundane answers aren't available, we reach for the extraordinary.
That is the exact moment the theory of the ancient alien monitor, the Black Knight, was truly cemented in the public consciousness. It just fed directly on Cold War existential dread.
Yeah, it really did. But for decades after 1954, the Black Knight remained kind of a legend built on a patchwork of historical anomalies. Tesla's numbers, the delayed echoes of the 20s, and Keyhoe's newspaper clippings.
Until 1998.
Yes, 1998.
That is when the internet finally got a visual. We transitioned from this folklore of invisible waves and classified radar reports into cold, hard photographic evidence.
So this was NASA's STS-88 mission, and this was a truly monumental flight. The Space Shuttle Endeavour was carrying the Unity node, which was the first American component of the International Space Station up to orbit to connect it to the Russian Zarya module.
It's literally the construction of the ISS in orbit, and during this mission, the astronauts capture a series of photographs of an object floating near the shuttle.
Right, and we should clarify, these aren't blurry, unverified images taken by a guy in his backyard through a foggy telescope.
No, these are official, high-resolution, 70-millimeter NASA photographs.
Yeah, exactly. And the images themselves are visually striking. The object appears completely black, just hovering in stark contrast over the bright blue and white backdrop of the Earth's atmosphere.
It possesses this bizarre, angular, almost armored shape. It looks absolutely nothing like a normal, human-made satellite.
Not at all.
There are no solar panels, no neat cylindrical body, no visible antennas. It looks like a heavy shard of dark metal.
Honestly, it almost resembles a Cylon Raider from Battlestar Galactica, or some sort of stealth fighter.
It really does. And here's where it gets really interesting. When those images were digitized and uploaded to the internet in the late 90s, it was like handing a Rorschach test to millions of people who were already convinced aliens were watching us.
Oh, absolutely.
They didn't see an ink blot. They saw exactly what they wanted to see. Conspiracy forums declared it the ultimate, undeniable proof. The Black Knight satellite was real, and NASA had accidentally published the visual evidence. So let's break down the believer's perspective here, based on our sources. The overarching theory states that this Black Knight object is an incredibly advanced piece of extraterrestrial technology, specifically calculated to be 13,000 years old.
And that 13,000-year figure is interesting because it loops perfectly back to Duncan Lunnan's star map from the 1920s radio echoes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he hypothesized the star map pointed to an origin point that aligned with the star Epsilon Boreas, specifically as it would have appeared roughly 13,000 years ago, taking stellar drift into account over the millennia.
Which ties perfectly into the era of ancient human history, right around the dawn of agriculture and the end of the last ice age.
Exactly.
So the theory suggests its mission is to sit up there in a polar orbit, quietly observing human activities. Like, it's been tracking our progress from hunter-gatherers to a spacefaring civilization, perhaps sending periodic progress reports back to its creators deep in the cosmos.
It frames humanity as part of a larger cosmic experiment, watched over by a silent ancient guardian. But the scientific reality of that 1998 photograph brings us crashing back down to Earth.
Yeah, does.
Because NASA officially identified the object, not as a 13,000-year-old probe, but as a dropped piece of space junk. Specifically, a lost thermal blanket.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how on earth does a thermal blanket end up looking like an armored alien spacecraft?
Well, during the STS-88 spacewalks, astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman were tasked with connecting vital cables and installing insulating covers on the exposed metal pins of the space station modules.
Okay.
These metal pins, they're called trunnion pins, they need covers to protect them from the extreme heat and cold cycling of orbital sunrise and sunset. And the covers themselves look like folded silver and white metallic sleeping bags.
And space is an incredibly unforgiving work environment. I mean, you're wearing bulky, pressurized gloves that severely limit your dexterity, and you're floating in zero gravity.
Exactly. So Newman was working on attaching one of these covers, and it slipped. In a microgravity environment, a simple slip means the object just gently drifts away.
Just floats off.
Yeah. Because it was on a slightly different orbital trajectory than the massive space shuttle, it slowly moved out of reach. The astronauts actually photographed it as it drifted off, which is just standard operating procedure for any lost item in orbit, so it can be tracked as potential debris.
Okay, so that explains why the object was there in the first place. But it doesn't really explain why it looked pitch black and menacing. I mean, a silver thermal cover should reflect light, right? It should look like a bright piece of foil.
You'd think so, but it really comes down to the extreme physics of lighting in a vacuum. Down here on Earth, our atmosphere scatters sunlight. It bounces around, it fills in shadows, which is why you can still see details on the dark side of a building during the day.
Right.
But in space, there is no atmosphere to scatter that light. You have blinding, unfiltered solar radiation hitting one side of an object and absolute pitch-black shadow on the other side.
So the side of the blanket facing the camera was just entirely in its own shadow.
Exactly. Furthermore, high-contrast photography in those conditions often blows out the bright spots and crushes the shadows into pure black.
Oh.
And as the thermal blanket drifted, it was also tumbling.
Right.
The vacuum of space and the extreme temperature changes caused the stiff metallic fabric to crinkle and lock into odd, rigid, angular shapes. So a flimsy piece of insulation, captured perfectly in silhouette against the bright Earth, genuinely looks like a dense, solid, dark structure.
Wow.
And it just stayed in orbit for a few days before it eventually fell back and burned up harmlessly in the atmosphere.
I mean, the mechanics of that make perfect sense. It's a textbook case of pareidolia, right? Our brain's tendency to perceive a specific, meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern.
Exactly.
You see a shadow in space, your brain fills in the gaps with the shape of a spaceship.
Hmm.
But a massive portion of the internet vehemently rejects NASA's explanation. Like, they entirely refuse to accept the thermal blanket reality.
This raises an important question, though, which forces us to look at the psychology behind the myth. Why does the mundane reality fail to satisfy us?
Because it's boring.
Well, yeah. It's a clerical error in space. An astronaut fumbled a piece of insulation. It's an incredibly human mistake happening in an extraordinary environment.
Yeah, a lost blanket is definitely boring. A 13,000-year-old alien probe wrapped in a massive government cover-up. Now, that is a narrative that gives our existence deep, profound meaning.
Exactly. It suggests that we are important enough to be watched, that we actually matter on a galactic scale. The thermal blanket explanation is rejected because it doesn't feed that core human desire for cosmic significance.
Right.
It's just much more comforting to believe in a grand sci-fi epic than to accept that our orbit is just slowly filling up with our own misplaced trash.
So what does this all mean? We've traveled from bizarre 1899 radio signals intercepted by Tesla to physical radio echoes baffling scientists in the 1920s to optical illusions causing military panic in 1954, all the way to a lost thermal blanket photographed in 1998.
It's quite a timeline.
It really is. It perfectly illustrates how isolated anomalies and honest mistakes get stitched together over decades to form a cohesive, thrilling narrative.
But while the evidence overwhelmingly points to a combination of natural phenomena and space debris, you know, the mystery remains incredibly resilient.
Yeah, people still believe it.
The Black Knight myth endures because the scientific explanations, however accurate they are, can never quite extinguish the romantic notion of the unknown. We just want the universe to be full of wonder.
Space is vast, it is dark, and it is full of real mysteries. The possibility, I mean, even a fraction of a percent of a possibility that we aren't alone is what keeps you and me looking up at the night sky.
So true. But I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over, building directly on the alien theory from our sources. Let's just play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the Black Knight really is a 13,000-year-old alien satellite designed to monitor human activity and send signals back home to its creators, what exactly does humanity's 13,000-year performance review look like?
Oh, wow. That is wild to think about. I mean, from the dawn of agriculture through endless empires, the Industrial Revolution, right up to our modern era where we argue about internet conspiracy theories and, drop thermal blankets in orbit. What is that cold, dark machine out there reporting back about you, me, and our progress as a species right now?
It's a terrifyingly good question.
Hmm.
Because if there really is a mysterious satellite orbiting Earth that humans did not build, sitting in the dark watching us, well, we just have to hope it has a sense of humor.